comunidad de Portside. Muchas gracias por reunirse con nosotros hoy. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have a busy agenda today, so we'll be going through a lot of content and welcome folks' questions and comments as they come up. At this moment, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Vicky, who will be one of our wonderful interpreters for today, who will give instructions on how to access interpretation.
Okay. Aló, buenas tardes. Si ustedes van a estar necesitando interpretación al español, si está usando su computadora portátil o de escritorio, hay que buscar en el Zoom abajo, busque un globo donde dice interpretación, va a escoger el español, Language Interpretation. Eso le permite escuchar el español en 80% de volumen y el inglés al 20% de volumen. También tienen la opción de apagar por completo el inglés si desean hacerlo. Y si están usando un teléfono, un dispositivo, iPad, tableta, busquen los 3 puntitos en la parte superior, lado derecho de su pantalla, y también haciendo el clic ahí va a ver el mismo globito, se escoja Language Interpretation y luego se escoja el español. Eso, ya terminé con lo del español. Eso se va a activar en un momento. Also, now I'm done with the Spanish interpretation on the main channel, but if for some reason you speak English, do not understand Spanish, and if something is going to be spoken in Spanish you want to understand, then you would choose the English channel on the bottom of your screen if you're using a computer, laptop, or desktop, and then on your phone or iPad or tablet, the top right dots, and that will get you to the globe, and then you can choose the English channel. Then anything spoken in Spanish will automatically be interpreted onto that channel. Thank you. I'm done. And waiting for the interpretation channel to begin. Yeah.
Thank you, Vicky. The interpretation channel is now open.
I'm not seeing it for the interpreters.
Joanny, can you assign Vicky and Gloria?
Yes, I've assigned Gloria. Vicky, we're having some trouble being able to assign you. Is it all right? I know you and Gloria take turns. Can we have Gloria start off in this first part of the meeting? And maybe if you hop off and join back on, we're able to add you.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to give it a few moments for folks to join the interpretation channel. Can someone confirm that they can hear the interpretation all right?
Yes, we can hear it, Tree. Thanks.
Thank you, Domingo and Alicia. Moving on. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us for the August Portside Community Steering Committee meeting. We're excited to have you all, and today we'll be having a lot of informational presentations on some exciting items that have been happening. Next slide, please. I'll pass it on to my colleague Joanny, who will go over the meeting objectives and the agenda items.
Hi, everyone. So today's objectives are to discuss the Portside Community Steering Committee survey results from last June. Then we'll learn about and provide some input on indirect source rule concepts being considered by the Air District. And finally, receive an update on the Port of San Diego's health risk assessment. And as Chewy mentioned, we have a very full agenda. After welcoming remarks and approval of last month's meeting and tonight's agenda, we'll move on to the presentation from the Portside, and then followed by the presentation on the indirect source rule concepts, and lastly, the update on the Portside health risk assessment. And then we'll close out with some public comments and closing remarks. And then just a quick reminder on our meeting agreements, which are to create space for everyone to contribute, step up and share your opinions, and step back if you've had a chance to contribute yours, to only have one person speak at a time, to listen to each other, to respect each other's opinions, knowledge, and perspectives, to be conscious of time, and to speak slowly and clearly for our interpreter. And I'll pass it back to Chewy for roll call.
Thank you, Johnny. And at this moment, I will be going down our committee member list. And if you can say you're present, much appreciated. Keith Corey, City of San Diego. Not seeing Keith. Is Shelby here? Hi, Shelby. I see
Sorry,
you.
hard time unmuting, but I'm here.
Thank you. Jack Munger.
I'm here. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Nancy Hedge.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Massey. Sarah Giovi.
Good evening, I'm here.
Hey, Sarah. Is Lydia Pellicer here?
I'm here, yes.
Hi, Lydia. Commissioner Naranjo let us know she won't be joining us today. Phil Gibbons.
I'm here, actually.
Oh,
Hi, I'm here.
Commissioner. Phil Gibbons.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry for the confusion.
Oh, no worries. Tim Garrett at Sandag.
I am here to mirror it.
Thank you, Tim. Joy Williams.
Good evening, I'm here.
Thank you. And a warm welcome to Nick Paul, who is the new alternate for EHC.
Everyone.
Martin Reeder, National City. Not seeing Martin. Is David Welch here? Not seeing David. Roman Partida Lopez, let us know he won't be joining us today. Dr. Stephanie Yoon.
I'm here.
Hi, Dr. Yoon. Not seeing Alejandro. Is Diane Remulian here? Not seeing Diane. Samantha Liu.
Good evening, present.
Samantha. Helen Haas.
Hello, everyone.
Helen. Slide, please. Dinah Willier, let us know she's coming a little late.
I'm here. I'm actually here.
Great,
Good
thank
evening,
you
everyone.
for joining us. Filomena Marino.
I'm here. Thank Filomena Marino for Barrio Logan.
Great, thank you, Filomena. Janice Reynoso. Not seeing Janice. John Alvarado. John, I see that you're on here. Hillary Medina. Not seeing Hillary. Alicia Sanchez.
Presente, aquí estoy. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. Margarita Moreno.
Estoy aquí, presente.
Gracias, Margarita. Naomi Sanchez. Not seeing Naomi. Vanessa Contreras.
Present, Vanessa Contreras.
Thank you. Salvador Razo Abrica. Not seeing Sal. Montserrat Hernandez.
Aquí, gracias.
Gracias, Montserrat. Sylvia Calzada.
Present.
Sylvia. Ashley Valentin.
Present.
Hey, Ashley. Josephine Talamantes. I believe she let us know she won't be able to make it. Maritza Contreras. Not seeing Maritza. Great. Thank you, everybody. And now for general updates, I wanted to hand it over to Domingo, who has a couple updates to share, and then we'll be passing it on to the California Air Resources Board for another update.
Thank you, Tree. Good night, everybody. I just have a couple of updates. I'll start. The first one is regarding our incentives program. We recently received approval for the shared haul zero emission truck pilot project, which is measure action E1 on our SERP. So we're very excited that we receive approval from CARB. We'll be able to move forward with this project. And this is going to support advancement of the deployment of heavy duty on-road electric trucks to demonstrate operational feasibility. It's a very important measure in our SERP, so we're excited about that. And for the next update regarding status of our monitoring stations, I'll turn it over to my colleague, David Soderman.
Good evening, everyone. I'm David Soderman. I just want to give a brief update. I want to kind of highlight our monitoring station called CTB, which we refer to in-house as Caltrans Boston, which is at the corner of Boston and South 29th Street, is active, and we have black carbon measurements there. And probably about 3 weeks ago, we got that site up and running. We're still working on the other sites, and we also are making great progress on getting our metals contract finalized and in place. And we should be meeting with the outside laboratory probably next month to talk about getting that program up and running. And we're still working on negotiating with the VOC contractor on terms and conditions. And that's all the monitoring updates I have for this month.
Thank you. So Jack has a quick question.
Yes, David, thank you very much for that report. I really appreciate it. Just wondering, when would you estimate that we would have sort of an update on the emissions that particularly the newer sampling equipment is recording and finding here, like at our next meeting, or
You're
is
talking
that possible?
like the black carbon measurements at Caltrans Boston, or are you talking
Yeah.
like the metals program?
What kind of an update on whatever we're measuring anywhere?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously, since it's just going, just starting, we haven't actually done any type of reviewing into the data and that kind of stuff, and we'll kind of wrap that into our normal quarterly review of the data. But I'm sure we can probably give a brief update next month, just kind of on what it's seeing relative to the other sites on that.
Great, thank you. That'd be great.
Garrett, do you have Tim?
Yes, just a clarification question. Domingo, could you say the name of that program again? The truck one?
Sure, this is for our short haul zero emission truck pilot project.
Great, thank you.
Sure, not a problem.
Great. Thank you. And with that, I want to hand it over to Sandra at the California Air Resources Board for an update.
Perfect. Thank you. Sandra Nguyen here with CARB. First, thank you guys for allowing us to give a quick update today. We wanted to update you guys on our Incentive Program Advisory Group, known as IPAG. For those of you unaware, at last year's November board hearing, CARB staff heard strong interest from several board members in helping further accelerate zero-emission vehicles and the equity work in the On-Road Moyer program and the On-Road Voucher Incentive Program, known as VIP. In response to that request, this year's Incentive Program Advisory Group was created. The IPAG features several board members, including board members Davina Hurt, Gideon Krakoff, and Vice Chair Sandra Berg. Through this process, some of the key themes identified have been the need to increase equitable funding opportunities such that small fleets are aware of where and how they can receive aid through the transition to zero-emission technology. We also heard the need to provide equitable public outreach and educational tools, such as a one-stop shop where everything is conveniently located. We also heard the value in public listening sessions where we can continue to hear and further understand some of the day-to-day hurdles from community members or small and minority-owned businesses. The feedback from these efforts could help find us ways where incentives could possibly alleviate some of those concerns. We also heard that one way that we could start this is by exploring partnership with community-based organizations with insight on how to conduct these type of outreach. We also heard strong interest in ensuring equitable access to incentives by ensuring incentives are available for those in disadvantaged and low-income communities. We also heard opportunities for fleets, especially in these communities, to have the necessary infrastructure support, as well as the additional funding opportunities with companies like CEC that could help identify clear and effective paths. I did want to mention, tentatively, we are set to have our third and final public meeting this fall. The draft VIP guidelines will be made available, and as we continue through this public process, we are set to have a memo to the board this November with updated VIP guidelines by the end of the year. We welcome and encourage feedback through this process, and we can be reached at the email in the lower right-hand corner there at ipag2022@arb.com. And I will also presentations and past presentations and recordings can be found on our website, and I can share that also in the link, and it's also here on the screen. And that concludes today's updates. Any questions?
Any questions for Sandra? Seeing none, if you can add those links to the chat, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Moving along to our next agenda item. So we wanted to open it up to the steering committee, asking for a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda and last month's meeting notes.
Martin Reeder, National City, so moved.
Thank you, Martin. Do we have a second?
Sarah Giobbi, I'll second.
Thank you, Sarah. For the sake of time, we'll open it up to see if anyone is opposed to the motion. If not, we'll go ahead and move it along. Thank you, everybody. And hi, Maritza, sorry. Yeah, no worries. I see you're here. Thank you. Moving along to the next agenda item, we have a short presentation on the June 2022 survey results. So as folks might have remembered, we canceled the June meeting and asked folks to fill out a quick survey to gauge what kind of topics and ideas folks have for future steering committee meetings. We'll be providing a quick overview of the key themes that came out of the results. We'll also be posting the raw survey results on the website after the meeting, and we'll let Portside steering committee members know when that's up and ready to be reviewed. I'll pass it on to my colleague who'll be going over the results.
Thank you, Chewy. So moving forward with the survey results, as Chewy mentioned, we sent out the survey to gather additional items for discussion during future steering committee meetings, as well as providing feedback on past meetings. So for the first here, as we see in this chart, in regards to past Portside steering committee meetings, about 57% of respondents rated the meeting as very effective, and 43% rated them as somewhat effective, indicating that for the most part, the Portside meetings have been effective. And next slide, please. Additionally, the following question asked about the top 2 things individuals liked about the steering committee meetings thus far, and are here listed on the slide, are the key themes that popped up that emerged from this question, which include collaboration and community building opportunity, as well as informative presentations, receiving updates from agencies, making this a safe space to ask questions, as well as learning opportunities from new programs and funding, and as well as having the opportunity to speak on issues that affect the community. Next slide. The next question we asked was about areas or topics that members would like to see covered at future Portside Steering Committee meetings. And common themes for this question included opportunities for collaboration between residents, agencies, and the industry, having more youth involvement, so involving youth into the meetings, getting regular updates from agencies, monitoring sites, both city and county, as well as progress on implementation, having additional discussion and analysis on air monitoring data, which includes comparison to other San Diego communities. So going a little bit abroad, as well as addressing issues around environmental racism. And lastly, we also gave the option for members to provide any additional comments on any of the questions asked from the survey above. And some comments included balancing statewide air quality related health issues with the localized AB 617 framework, as well as incorporating other key stakeholders into the conversations that steering committee has. An example that was given was BNSF, and also having the consideration of conflict of interest policy for any Portside members. So now we want to move forward with the discussion to get any general reactions on the survey results. How can the meetings better serve the broader Portside community, and any other items that you would like to see at these meetings going forward? So we open the space for anyone to ask any questions on the slides or the survey results, and also provide any comments.
This is Shelby from the city. And I see that, there was a mention of updates from the city, and we're happy to provide that. I guess there might be like a request for a little bit more of a refined request. Like what exactly do you want to get updates on? Is it just the climate action plan at a high level? Those that impact, a certain community, or any of the strategies in particular. So we could talk more about that, but happy to do it, and glad to see that there's interest. So.
Great, thanks, Shelby. John? You're on mute, John.
Sorry about that. With the schools opening up next week here in Barrio Logan, I would really like someone to reach out other than just myself to Fernando, who's the principal. He's kind of the head guy for the 8 schools that we represent here, and would really like to get the word out to the families about what's going on. I would really like the families to get involved more, and I think it would be a real positive thing. You can't believe how much disinformation is going on right now in the community, okay? And I think it would serve us well to get the word out that, we're a friend to the community. We're not just some action group trying to manipulate the community as a whole.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the suggestion. Joy?
Yeah, thank you for sharing those survey results. They're really interesting. I think when I was responding to the survey, one thing I was thinking about was that, for the first couple years, it was pretty clear what we were doing in these meetings as we put the SERP together. Now that we're done with that, it seems like one use of these meetings is to track the implementation of the SERP. There's more things in that CERP than any of us, I'm sure, can actually have memorized in our mind. So how do we go through systematically and see, what are we on track with? How are we doing with all the commitments that all of us made under the CERP? So that was one thing I had in mind, for example, when, I thought we needed updates from the cities, for example. So I wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Any other comments folks want to add? So definitely hearing, getting more updates just from implementing agencies, working on specific sections of the CERP.
Sorry, Chui, if I may just make a quick comment on that. I've been collecting information from all of our partner agencies to put together the annual CERP report and submit it to CARB. And our intent was initially to bring it to the group today, but we moved that item to next month, given that we had a little bit of time before we were able to submit it to CARB, and also just timing to be able to present on the items that we'll be discussing today, because those were a little bit more timely. But just so that everybody knows, that presentation is coming next month. And in addition to that presentation, obviously agencies are welcome to use this platform to present on more details or more specifics regarding all the actions that they're working on to benefit the community or to help implement the CERP. So I just wanted to mention that. And also, sorry, last thing, thanks again to all of our partner agencies for all the work that they've been doing and for all the information that they've provided.
Thank you, Domingo. I see Montserrat, followed by Sarah.
Sí, bueno, estoy pensando que antes cuando se hacían estas juntas en persona, recuerdo que había más participación comunitaria y de otras agencias. No sé si se pudiera pensar en tener este tipo de reuniones otra vez en persona y darle más difusión a estas juntas para poder invitar a más miembros de la comunidad que se involucren, porque creo que de los que estamos participando en el comité no se ha movido. Somos casi los mismos que participamos desde hace más de 2 años. Así que sí sería bueno, ¿verdad? Que tuviéramos más difusión y más participación de agencias, obviamente, pero también de la comunidad. Gracias.
Gracias, Montserrat. I sent a quick reminder a little too late, but yeah, if folks missed that, Montserrat gave the suggestion to consider meeting in person again. We used to meet at Logan Elementary School, I believe, down in Portside community. Definitely something I think we should definitely consider, and we can talk more with the Air District on how we can do that while abiding to public health protocols. Sarah?
Yeah, I actually have a comment pretty similar to what Montserrat said, which is, it sounds like there is just this core group of people that keep coming to these things and enjoy. Like, I noticed the same thing she did, which is once the CERP was approved, the meetings have kind of taken a turn. Maybe it's anecdotal, but it seems like a lot of folks on the roster are not showing up regularly. So I don't know if there are other barriers we need to look into, or if we have some folks that just have lost interest and we need to fill their position with folks that are, or if there's something about the maybe meeting in person or a technology barrier or something like that. But I think we should give some thought to how to make sure that we have ongoing participation, and if we're over meeting or we need to scale it back or whatever we need to do. But I think we need to ask some questions here.
Thank you, Sarah, for that comment. Any other suggestions?
Hi, this is Keith Corey from the mayor's office in the city of San Diego. Just piggybacking on that comment, realizing that no time during the day is convenient for a 2-hour meeting. It is difficult, just personally speaking, for working families with children to tune in and be engaged in a meeting that goes from 5 to 7 at the end of a day, just because that's when folks come home to their families and try to get dinner on the table and kids to bed. So to the extent that we can talk further about maybe putting this somewhere else during the working day, that's my feedback. I also totally understand that we are putting it towards the end of the day for other people to attend. So I do think that's something of a challenge, but something I wanted to flag.
Thank you, Keith. It's a great suggestion. Montserrat, ¿tiene algo más para compartir?
Sí, solamente para contestar no me fijé quién dio la opinión anterior, pero solo para contestar, yo soy organizadora comunitaria para la Coalición de Salud Ambiental y hemos estado ya haciendo reuniones en persona y sí hemos tenido participación comunitaria. Solamente pues organizar bien la junta, invitar a la gente con tiempo y pues proveerles tal vez no sé, cuidado de niños o algo ligero para cenar y animar a la gente para que acuda a estas juntas y si se hace con tiempo, como son cada mes, entonces tenemos esa oportunidad, pero sí, deberíamos de ver qué consenso hay, ¿verdad? Con los demás miembros del comité.
Thank you, Montserrat. All those suggestions on how to incentivize more folks to come through childcare, snacks, or a light meal. It's something we used to do definitely pre-pandemic. So yeah, we'll definitely consider that. Someone also suggested, Commissioner Naranjo also suggested possibly exploring a hybrid model where we do the meeting both in person and for those who need to join virtually can also do so. Definitely a lot of things we need to think about and regroup for sure with the Air District. Okay. Domingo?
Thank you, Chuy, and gracias, Montserrat. Thank you, everybody, for their comments. I wanted to just mention that it might be good for us to do maybe another survey just specifically about meeting logistics, just to see what the sentiment is of the majority in the steering committee. I know that when the SERP was recently approved, we brought this to the table to talk about both meeting frequency and whether we wanted to have in-person versus hybrid versus virtual meetings. And at that time, the consensus was to continue with virtual meetings. I know that things might have changed now, so I think it's a good opportunity for us to revisit all those topics and have that conversation again, and maybe Chuy will regroup and organize another survey just specifically on meeting logistics, and then based on the consensus of the group, we'll move forward with that. But all of these are great ideas and comments from everybody, so thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Jack?
Just one suggestion. Maybe we need to hire a community organizer to help, help get people to turn out to the meetings in the future. Just a thought.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, definitely wonder how other committees are doing this. Nick?
Yeah, Chewy, quick question. So in the past, you referenced that meetings used to take place in person at schools and stuff. Was the time of the meetings still 5 to 7, or was it like directly after school, maybe pull in some parents and stuff from wherever the host school was? How did that look like before?
It was actually it went from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And I believe the reason for that was for folks to travel and get to the location after work. Ashley?
I have a quick suggestion. I think that the language could be a little inaccessible to the public, especially for people that are interested in environmental justice. For instance, a lot of my friends that are from Logan Heights are interested in this topic and want to continue to advocate for more clean air. However, when I show them the links, they're a little intimidated because they feel like these terms are a little bit more difficult to understand. So maybe it may be extra work, but creating a small booklet of this is what this term means, and this is the projects that are involved, and here are the links that gives you a little bit more details about the project. Here are the people that you can communicate if you want to get involved, and maybe that way we're kind of finding a solution for the language barrier.
Thank you, Ashley. That's a great suggestion. And yeah, I remember CARB had a term definition list for, it might have been for a different document, but definitely something we can and should build off of. Jack?
Thank you, Chewy. I think that's a fabulous suggestion, and it's one that has come up in various forms over the last 3 years about providing some periodic fundamental sessions, if you will, to talk about terms, to talk about testing results, to be able just to kind of explain what this complex air emission measurement and reduction process really entails. It's huge and it's extremely complicated. And I totally agree with the previous speakers that I just think it would be a great idea to find to spend part of our time on just making sure people that whatever questions they have or whatever particular programs they don't understand or whatever's being presented to them in terms of graphs and all that on the website makes sense. So I thought that was a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I got a message from Montserrat that the Spanish interpretation isn't coming through. Okay, it's back. Liliana?
Hi, good evening. These are all super good comments, and I'm really happy to be listening in on this conversation. I did hear you, Chewy, say, how are other communities doing this? One thing that I do want to point out is I really think that this CSC has one of the highest engagement rates compared to other CSCs throughout the state. But I basically want to raise my hand and hold myself accountable that I can bring back other strategies other communities are doing to help engage with residents and and have more engagement during the CSC meetings. So that's it.
Thank you, Liliana. Yeah, we definitely appreciate it. Phil, and this will be your last comment before we move on to the next item.
Okay, well, thanks, Chewy. And I'll just kind of pile on to the idea of providing some more public-friendly material for the community to better understand things. I think that's a great way to engage with folks, and perhaps with the report out that Domingo will be doing in the coming weeks on our achievements over the past year or so, that's a good opportunity to create some public-friendly material that we can distribute to folks. I too have heard, just as Liliana had mentioned, that our SERP group is one of the most engaged throughout the state. So we are a model, and perhaps by doing these types of public-friendly kind of efforts, we'll just heighten that even more. So Thanks.
Thanks, Phil, and thanks everybody. Really appreciate everyone's input, and we'll definitely be bringing this back. Yeah, since definitely engagement is one of the core principles of this program. Great. Moving along, I wanted to hand it over to the Air District. Randy and Angela will be giving a presentation on a new policy that was identified in the SERP, the indirect source rule.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Randy Consolation, Associate Engineer in the Rule Development Group at the district. Joining me on the panel today is Angela Ortega, Supervisor of Rule Development. I will be providing an informational update on the evaluation of a potential indirect source rule, or ISR. Consistent with the requirements of Assembly Bill 423, Action C3 in the Portside SERP also specifies that the district shall evaluate and, if feasible, propose a new rule to control emissions from indirect sources. Next slide, please. What is an indirect source? The Clean Air Act defines an indirect source as a facility, building, structure, installation, real property, road, or highway which attracts or may attract mobile sources of pollution. AB 423 directs the district to consider adopting an indirect source rule to address pollution from mobile sources that are associated with stationary sources, such as ports, warehouses, and distribution centers. Next slide, please. The following is the typical rule development process used when considering a new rule or rule amendment. The process begins with a background phase, which includes conducting extensive research, such as reviewing relevant documents, for example, regulations from EPA, CARB, and other California air districts, identifying the affected sources, evaluating possible control options, and calculating baseline emissions, potential emission reductions, and cost effectiveness. Gathering input from various stakeholders through site visits, meetings, or work groups. Based on the results of all this research, the feasibility of moving forward with a rule proposal is determined. If the proposal is deemed feasible, rulemaking staff will develop and finalize the draft rule language and solicit additional input from stakeholders by conducting one or more workshops. A workshop report is then prepared addressing all comments and questions raised at the workshop, and the report is distributed. Rulemaking staff will also finalize a socioeconomic impact assessment if needed, as well as perform a California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, review. A board letter package is prepared and submitted to the governing board for consideration of adoption of the proposal. The length of time the rule development process takes will vary depending on the complexity of the rule proposal. For example, a straightforward amendment of an existing rule may take up to 1 year to complete. For this ISR project, rulemaking staff is currently working on the background phase highlighted in green. Today's presentation is a summary of this initial research to date. Next slide, please. Legal authority and limits. The California Health and Safety Code provides the district with the primary authority to control air pollution from all sources except emissions from motor vehicles, adopt rules to meet state and federal air quality standards, and reduce or mitigate emissions of air pollution from indirect sources. However, there are legal limits to the district's authority. Local cannot interfere with local city or county control over land use decisions. State, California's Proposition 26, any fee component in a rule cannot be a tax or improper regulatory fee. Federal, an indirect source rule needs to consider areas of federal preemption in which federal law preempts state or local law. For example, per the Clean Air Act, the district cannot adopt a motor vehicle emission standard, or per the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act, cannot relate to price, routes, or service of motor carriers. Next slide, please. Other California air districts have used different strategies to address emissions from indirect sources, which include the following. Several air districts adopted fee-based rules, which assess a fee during new development permitting to help pay for mitigation projects. Other air districts outline the permitting process for new developments, which includes performing an analysis on expected emissions and air quality impact, or air modeling of on-road and off-road emissions. Another rule applies to new residential, commercial, and industrial developments and requires the mitigation of emissions during and after construction. The strategy of the South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is the adjacent air district north of San Diego, includes various facility-based mobile source measures. These measures most closely align with the AB 423 directives. Some examples include Warehouse Rule 2305, which was adopted in May 2021. The rule applies to warehouses with 100,000 square feet or more of indoor floor space. There are an estimated 3,320 warehouses in this size range within South Coast jurisdiction. The rule requires that a specific number of points be earned every year based on truck trips. Points may be earned by selecting various actions or investments from a specific menu, developing a custom plan, or paying a mitigation fee. South Coast baseline warehouse indirect source emissions were estimated to be over 11,000 tons per year nitrogen oxide, NOx, and over 200 tons per year diesel particulate matter, PM. NOx emission reductions from this rule were estimated to be between 3 and 7%. The rule was developed primarily to reduce NOx emissions needed for ozone attainment. A co-benefit was reduced localized exposure to diesel PM in communities near warehouses. In addition, South Coast is currently working on developing a separate indirect source rule for commercial marine ports. Next slide, please. AB 423 specifies ports as an indirect source for the district to consider for a potential rule. According to the Port of San Diego's Maritime Clean Air Strategy, MCAS, the 2019 emissions inventory includes sources such as ocean-going vessels, harbor craft, cargo handling equipment, freight rail, and heavy-duty trucks as shown here. The total baseline emissions were estimated to be 737 tons per year NOx and 17.6 tons per year diesel PM. These emissions mostly impact the Portside community. Next slide, please. The following are some potential control strategies being considered by the Port of San Diego outlined in their MCAS. Zero emission truck visits for all trucks that call to the port's 2 marine cargo terminals, zero emission cargo handling equipment, near zero or zero emission harbor craft or other lower emitting technologies, near zero or zero emission transition for port-owned fleet of vehicles, and equip marine terminals with shore power and or an alternative technology to reduce ocean-going vessel emissions for ships that call to the port. Next slide, please. In addition to ports, AB 423 requires that warehouses and distribution centers also be considered for a potential indirect source rule. For simplicity, the term warehouses will be used to mean both warehouses and distribution centers in this presentation. The district contacted the San Diego Association of Governments, or SANDAG, for assistance with identifying the number, the size, and the location of local warehouses. According to information they provided, current as of March 2021, there are approximately 3,300 total warehouses ranging in size from less than 1,000 to 3.3 million square feet located throughout San Diego County. At this time, it is not known how many of these buildings are conducting warehousing activities resulting in indirect source emissions. More research is needed to develop a more accurate warehouse inventory. For comparison, South Coast has more than 3,300 warehouses with 100,000 square feet or more floor area. This map shows the location of most of the 3,300 warehouses located in San Diego County. The Portside and international border communities are shown in red. Preliminary baseline indirect source emissions for all 3,300 warehouses are estimated to be over 1,100 tons per year NOx and 20 tons per year diesel PM. For comparison, the total region-wide NOx emissions in San Diego County are estimated at 27,000 tons per year, and total region-wide diesel PM 2.5 emissions are 255 tons per year. Warehouse indirect source emissions account for 4% of the total region-wide NOx emissions and less than 8% of the total region-wide diesel PM 2.5 emissions. Next slide, please. There are 96 warehouses with 100,000 square feet floor area or more shown in yellow on the map. This warehouse size threshold is consistent with that of South Coast Rule 2305. These 96 warehouses represent 3% of the San Diego region's total warehouse inventory. Preliminary baseline indirect source emissions from these warehouses are estimated to be 297 tons per year NOx and 5 tons per year diesel PM. This represents about 26% of total indirect source emissions from all regional warehouses. The top 3 areas in the region where these buildings are located include Otay Mesa, Sorrento Valley, and Poway. Due to the differences in the warehouse inventory compared with that in the South Coast region, adopting a rule exactly like Rule 2305 may not result in significant emission reductions in San Diego County. Next slide, please. For warehouses with 50,000 square feet or more of floor area, there are 177 additional buildings between 50,000 and 100,000 square feet. These are shown in orange on the map. In total, these 273 warehouses with 50,000 square feet or more of floor area represent 8% of the region's total warehouse inventory. Preliminary baseline indirect source emissions for these 273 warehouses are estimated to be 488 tons per year NOx and 8 tons per year diesel PM. This represents about 43% of the total indirect source emissions from all regional warehouses. The top 6 areas in the region where these buildings are located include Otay Mesa, Sorrento Valley, Poway, Carlsbad, Vista, and Logan Heights. Next slide, please. The following are some potential control strategies that could be considered for warehouses. The acquisition of near zero or zero emission trucks, near zero or zero emission truck visits, zero emission yard trucks acquisition or use, zero emission charging or fueling infrastructure, which include electric charging or hydrogen station installation and use, solar panel system installation and use, and air filtration systems, which would be installed at sensitive receptors within some distance from a warehouse. Next slide, please. To date, the district has conducted 6 stakeholder meetings to elicit feedback on concepts to consider as district staff evaluates potential indirect source measures. The following are some key comments received. The district should consider land ports of entry as an indirect source. Due to the complexity of land ports of entry, further research and evaluation by district staff will be needed. Consider warehouses smaller than the South Coast Rule 2305 threshold of 100,000 square feet. Varying perspectives on requirements for near zero versus zero emission technologies. Technological feasibility and availability of potential control strategies, including cost and infrastructure. Codifying indirect source emission reduction requirements in a Memorandum of Understanding or MOU or rule may limit access to federal and state incentive funding, and evaluate current and upcoming mobile source CARB regulations to avoid duplicative requirements. Next slide, please. The following is a summary table of preliminary NOx and diesel PM emission estimates for the Port of San Diego, warehouses throughout the county, and emissions for on-road mobile sources at the international border community. The baseline emissions are subject to change pending additional information and analysis. For the Port of San Diego marine terminals, the emissions shown here mostly impact the Portside community. One potential approach could be to pursue an MOU to solidify previously identified strategies in their MCAS to address emissions from one or more of their source categories. This could be an alternative to a port-specific indirect source rule. For warehouses, by comparison, the indirect source emissions associated with warehouses are spread throughout the county, though there are some areas with higher warehouse concentrations. District staff will continue researching vehicle miles traveled, truck trips, and potential emission reduction strategies. A potential strategy could be the continued evaluation of a warehouse rule in coordination with the ongoing development of the international border SERP. For the land ports of entry, at this time, the district currently does not have baseline emission estimates specifically for the land ports of entry. However, baseline emissions for on-road mobile sources for the entire international border community on the US side were estimated by CARB to be 167 tons per year NOx and 1.1 tons per year diesel PM. It should be noted that these on-road emissions include the emissions from mobile sources crossing the land ports of entry, truck trips to and from warehouses located in the international border community, and other on-road mobile sources. The district will continue coordination on refining the baseline emissions and evaluating potential emission reduction strategies as part of the ongoing development of the international border SERP. Next slide, please. Next steps. District staff efforts to continue the evaluation of possible indirect source measures will include, but is not limited to, the following. Consider options for an MOU with the Port of San Diego for potential opportunities to solidify strategies included in their MCAS into specific requirements. Continue to conduct one-on-one meetings with various stakeholders. Refine limits of the district's legal authority to regulate indirect sources, including land ports of entry. Refine emission estimates and reductions, including working with SANDAG and others to gather region-specific data. Calculate cost effectiveness for various control options that could be implemented as part of a potential indirect source rule. Evaluate CARB's various ongoing mobile source rulemakings to determine areas of potential overlap. Develop rule concepts based on staff research and stakeholder input, and evaluate district resources needed for ongoing development and future implementation of an indirect source program. In addition, district staff will continue to engage with stakeholders and conduct public informational meetings or work groups for additional input. District staff plans to return to the governing board to provide a status update in early 2023. Next slide, please. This concludes the staff informational update presentation. We are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. I'd like to open it up to members of the steering committee to see if they have any questions. Great. John, followed by Shelby. Go ahead, John. I believe you're on mute.
My question has to do with identifying, for instance, like you're talking about border traffic and whatnot. And, you know, we got one of the world's busiest borders right here in San Diego to Tijuana. But in addition to that, you know, I've been on this water now probably for well over 60 years. And both as a fisherman, commercial fisherman, and sport diver. And there's always been considerable amount of pollution, if you will, coming from offshore. I have asked in the past for some of the information regarding that, and as of yet have not received anything. I think it's important that we not only identify sources, but are able to actually put a number to a particular source a little closer to home. In other words, if it's we're talking about A, B, C, how much did A do? How much did B do? How much did C do? And so that we can get a better understanding as to the who, the what, and the where. Talking about a very broad number, it's hard to wrap your head around it. And I know for myself, back in the day, all the, if you will, when the winds from the north would blow south, we would get all the pollution and whatnot from up north. And then we would literally have black and purple pollution, right? 20 miles off the coast. And then when the winds would come up in the afternoon, which generally are from the west to the east, all of this would come flowing in. I used to be a contractor for Starkist Tuna down in Mexico. We used to take our boats down there, and the same was true down there. When the winds would come up, it would just blow all of this pollution in. And so I'd really like to address some of those issues a little closer and get a better sense. I mean, like in the case of Coronado, Coronado is just a little behind Barrio Logan. Now, how do they get so much when the predominant winds are coming from the west to the east? So they're not getting the shipyards. So I'd like to be able to identify those a little bit closer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment, John. Yeah, we make every effort to have a complete inventory. In this case, it'll be, we're looking at warehouses, ports, yeah, and so we do our best to kind of identify what are the sources that have emissions, and do our best to quantify them. The challenging part is that a lot of these, or I should say all of these, are looking at mobile type of equipment, and that's not within the normal working routine of what we do here at the district. Our primary responsibility is for stationary sources. So it's a totally different animal in terms of stationary versus mobile. So it's a new endeavor for us, pursuing an indirect source rule. But again, we're going to be interfacing with other agencies to kind of get their assistance in terms of gathering information, even further analysis to better quantify or identify and then quantify the emissions from the various sources that impact local communities.
If I can respond to that, for instance, everyone says all this pollution here in Barrio Logan is coming from the shipyards. And they're just a very small piece of the entire equation, especially when you consider on these westerly winds going east, and they're also getting all of that coming through. So for me, it would be better to understand the overall problem if we're able to actually separate those things. You put a testing station on this side of the bay next to the shipyards like they used to have down there at Perkins. And you're not just getting the shipyards, you're getting everything beyond, all the way to the other side of the bay. That's my point.
Thank you, John. We have quite a few folks in the queue, so want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask a question. Shelby, followed by Nick, followed by Joy.
Thanks. Randy, this was really interesting information. And so I guess my comment is more of a request maybe to have a follow-up conversation. I'm from the city of San Diego. and working on the climate action plan work. So I'd love to touch base not only on our upcoming REACH code work, which, although I know you pointed out the non-point versus point source implications of the data you were sharing and potential rules that you're considering, I think it would be helpful to also just compare notes for our REACH code, since there are some EV infrastructure components to what we're potentially considering in the city. And also in the future, looking towards some existing building feedback, and would just love to dig into where you got this information of where, and also see if there's a little bit more, do you have building vintage information and fuel source information, things like that. So if you would be willing to share your contact information, I would love to follow up.
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Shelby. I would definitely like to meet with you, and I'll provide my contact information on the chat.
Great, appreciate it.
Nick.
Hi, Randy. Thanks again for the presentation. I think it's really exciting that your district's considering drafting a rule to address this. It's a big problem for our community, specifically at the port. As you were kind of going through your presentation, though, I have two reflections that kind of wanted to share out. One thing that, as we're kind of developing this rule, I kind of worry about the focus on size. And I think during the presentation, you made reference to, I think it was 50,000 square feet. A lot of our warehouses, specifically in Barrio Logan and National City, are a lot smaller than that. And I think even small warehouses of 10,000 square feet can produce a lot of truck traffic that can be harmful for community members. So yeah, that's one of my reflections I wanted to share out, and I hope it's a consideration in the rule drafting process. The second one, though, is thinking about the consideration of a phased implementation process for this rule. I think there's certain communities that are more impacted by warehouse traffic. I'm thinking about homes right next to warehouses in Barrio Logan and in National City, whereas maybe in other parts, you mentioned Sorrento Valley, Poway, where that zoning just doesn't exist, right? So I wonder if this indirect source rule, when it's developed, if it's developed, when it comes to implementing it, if we can prioritize our communities that are mostly impacted, specifically here in the port communities and in the border region also. Yeah, just some reflections. Super exciting stuff, though. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for your comments. One, your first point about size, it's not necessarily that we're going to be sticking to only looking at, warehouses 50 and above. It just so happens that, again, with comparing with South Coast rule, their threshold was at 100,000 and above, because a lot of their inventory are big warehouses. But the majority of the warehouses in San Diego, as you mentioned, are smaller, and you're going to be seeing them in local communities that could be in close proximity to those warehouses. So it is a factor that we'll be looking at, not just square footage, but also how close are they to sensitive receptors, residences, schools, so on and so forth. That is a factor. And in regards to a phased-in implementation, that's a very good suggestion. Thank you, because it recognizes that some areas will need more of that focused energy or efforts to reduce emissions in comparison to others. So that's a good concept for us to consider once we move forward with the warehouse indirect source rule.
Thank you, Nick and Randy. Joy, followed by Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Randy. It is exciting that the district is moving ahead with this rule and seeing all the work you've already done on thinking through the concepts and starting to gather data. Regarding the two potential approaches, fee-based versus facility-based, I mean, I do think it's important to keep in mind that unlike LA, I mean, our primary and really only goal in this is to reduce exposure to emissions immediately, downwind. So it really does need to be facility-based. It needs to have the intent and the results being that there's fewer emissions from indirect sources coming to facilities, and that it benefits air quality in the downwind vicinity of those facilities. So I wanted to say that. I do support the kinds of control strategies that you're looking at so far. Really good to see all the focus on ZEV as a potential concept. And I wanted to note also that I know that APCD cannot regulate land, and I'm not suggesting you should try to do that in this rule, but I'd like to just note that APCD and the steering committee could go on the record in support of keeping the warehouse and industrial areas of OTI industrial. That, on both the city and county side, we've seen proposals or actual residential developments, and that could only serve to create incompatible land uses, such as we're battling in Portside neighborhoods. So, that's something that is new. Residential developments are proposed. I mean, we could go on the record and say that this is a bad idea. This is why. And having this data that you're collecting now would be helpful for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thank you. And I actually wanted to, I didn't know Joey was making that comment, and I wasn't originally going there, but I do want to say, I think she makes a really good point. I've seen it in my community where industrial sites are being turned over for residential uses, and in a lot of cases, lower income or housing for vulnerable people being placed right in the middle of industrial areas. So I'd second that. We need to create and maintain buffers between where people live and where industrial activity occurs. But my original point was, Randy, have you guys considered if there's going to be a point system, have you thought about that? Perhaps you want to make sure that you're not structuring it to disincentivize early action. So and what I mean by that is, if you can only earn points in the year that you're regulated, if you might have otherwise been inclined to take action earlier, you might put it off to wait to get this points. And in some ways, otherwise you'd be penalized by taking action earlier. You know what I mean? So I don't, it sounds like you've got a complicated problem in front of you, but I just want to throw that out on the table that maybe there's a way to build in incentives for early action.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah, for that comment. Again, we kind of mentioned South Coast, how they did you were mentioning a point system. Whether or not we'll be implementing the same for San Diego is not certain. We might structure it similarly, but yeah, we'll take that into consideration. We certainly don't want to build into the system, whatever that may look like, to not be able to have some type of to penalize incentives, as you were mentioning.
Thank you. I think this will be our last comment and question. Jack?
Thank you. I just wanted to follow Joy's comment. It's ironic to me to hear her make that today, because I just came across and learned earlier this afternoon that the city of San Diego is considering something called prime industrial flex, which would allow certain residential construction to be constructed in communities that are prime industrial in order to maximize, housing developments around industrial job sites, that sort of thing. And I could not agree with her more that is just not something that the city has ever found to be a good idea. I know IEA, I know EHC, I know many other organizations have constantly voiced the opinion that we have to keep these prime industrial sites as they are. Introducing residential housing into them is completely inappropriate and definitely not in anybody's health best interests. So I was really glad to hear that point raised, and I just wanted to bring this point up for everybody's information, that there will always be pressure to do that because there's much more profit to be earned in residential construction than there is in industrial. So the pressure will always be on builders and developers to switch their land over to residential if they can. And that's what we're going to be faced with. And I think this debate will be heating up here literally in the next 2 months for the city's future plans.
All right, thank you, Jack.
Thank you, everybody. I did want to be conscious of time. So if you have any other questions on this, please feel free to contact Randy's email in the chat. Moving along, I want to hand it over to the Port of San Diego team, who will be giving an update on the Portside Health Risk Assessment, which they presented on, I believe, back in April or May.
Hey. Yeah, thanks everyone. This is Phil Gibbons from the Port of San Diego, and I'm joined tonight by Peter Eicher. He's going to be doing most of the presentation actually, and then our consultant, Matt, excuse me, Matt McFalls is also on the call from Ascent Environmental. So as Chewy just said, we did provide an update to the steering committee back in May on the results of our health risk assessment. But even prior to that, we had actually presented a preliminary health risk assessment to our board in December of 2021. We got a lot of feedback from stakeholders that we incorporated into the analysis that you all saw in May. And just to remind you, at that meeting in May, you also heard the CARB health analysis that they had conducted too. So you got to see CARB's analysis and the ports side by side. CARB's was a little bit grander in scale, looking at all of the sources of pollution that impact the community, whereas the port's health risk assessment just looks at our sources from our 2 marine terminals. But we presented our final results to our board in June. And now the HRA has been on our website for the past few weeks. So it's there for you to look at, to download, to look at all the data sources, et cetera, that go into that. And we're happy to discuss those with you tonight and afterwards if you see fit. Why don't we go to the next slide, please? So the health risk assessment, I'll start with just saying that the Maritime Clean Air Strategy, as you all know, was adopted in October of 2021 with a vision of health equity for all. We have a variety of objectives in our Maritime Clean Air Strategy to reduce emissions from our activities. One of our objectives, though, was to do a health risk assessment to evaluate the sources of pollution that are generated at our 2 cargo terminals, 10th Avenue in the north and National City in the south, to see what kind of impacts those have on the community. And then also look into the future with implementation of the Maritime Clean Air Strategy to see how those health impacts will be reduced. And that's what Peter's going to be showing you in a moment. Let's go to the next slide. So this just describes the health risk assessment. It's important to note that this is really our baseline health risk assessment. We haven't done anything like this before holistically. So this is our baseline, and then we can compare future health risk assessments to this one. So all of this baseline information is representative of 2019 activity. And as you'll see in the upcoming slides, and as you perhaps remember from May, is that the different communities, whether it's National City, Barrio Logan, or even downtown San Diego and Coronado, differ in the types of health impacts and different types of source contribution to those locations. So that's important to keep in mind as Peter walks you through this. But I'll hand it over to Peter now to go through the heart of the data.
All right, thanks, Phil. Good evening, everyone. Peter Eicher. I'm a project program manager at
Port of San Diego. So health risk assessment, as Phil was just saying, it focused on diesel particulate matter emissions coming from our 2 marine terminals. And maybe Phil, if you could put the link to our HRA in the chat, maybe that way help get people to go ahead and take a look at that report. The report itself isn't too big, but there's a lot of deep information in the appendices. So if you really want to dig into methodologies and source contribution, that kind of thing, take a look at the appendices as well. Okay, so this will be the level of activity from 2019. This is what our inventory was taking place at. And these are our emission source types: ocean-going vessels, commercial harbor craft, cargo handling equipment, heavy-duty trucks, and freight rail. If you can go to the next slide, please. And then just a simple graphic kind of to put this in geographic context here of the Portside community there in green, and then our 2 terminals there, 10th Avenue Marine Terminal and National City Marine Terminal. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned, we did put out some preliminary documentation, and we did get some feedback, and we made some updates to the various modeling parameters. And those are some of them kind of summarized here. I guess I'll just maybe highlight one of the changes that we made, because it kind of speaks to the complexity of these models and how things you think maybe would change, but they don't always change when you kind of tweak some of those dials, or they change very little. So for one thing, when we first modeled the emissions from the trucks, we just looked at the emissions from 10th Avenue Marine Terminal to the on-ramps of the freeways. We got feedback that said, hey, you know, the freeways cut through our community. You should be counting emissions for those trucks when they're on the freeway. We agreed, we modeled that, we got those emissions, we put them in the update. The other part of the feedback was, you know, it's great that we have the designated truck route, and the vast majority of trucks are using it, but some don't. There are some bad actors out there. So there are some trucks running down some of the streets that they're not supposed to be running to. You should model that and see what it does. We did that as well. So that changed a little bit of the ultimate number of the health risk assessment. And that also changed a little bit of the relative contribution of those emissions from the trucks to that risk. But really the change came because we added essentially new emissions, more emissions from that truck driving on the freeway. When we changed into those surface streets, that wasn't new emissions, that was different emissions, and it spreads differently, you know, as it moves around the community, but it really didn't change the risk all that much. But sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And you really don't know until you change these parameters and rerun the model. And so every time you rerun the model, you're going to get different results. That's the point of the model. So the big reveal is coming up here. We can go to the next slide. These are our baseline conditions. Thank you. These are our baseline conditions for 2019. We've got them broken down by each of the 4 communities that kind of surround those port terminals. You can see there in National City, it's 20.6 per million people. Barrio Logan, 19.7 per million people. A little bit less there in downtown San Diego and Coronado. And then you can see in the pie charts there, that kind of breaks out the relative contribution of those sources to that risk. That means, as you can see there in that brown color, that is rail switching and the freight rail line. That's one of the bigger contributors. That's about 44% of the risk there in National City. That's that brown color. In Barrio Logan, it's cargo handling equipment. And that's that kind of mustardy color at 41% in Barrio Logan. So as Phil mentioned, different communities, it's all the same sources, but those sources contribute to that risk in different ways. And this has to do with proximity. It has to do with meteorological wind patterns that was being discussed a little bit in the last presentation or some of the comments, and a lot of other factors as well. Next slide, please. Let's keep moving here. So the next part of it was we tried to forecast, okay, what happens to that risk when we implement the MCAS? Getting there. There it is. So these are the actions that we want to implement with MCAS, right? So we want to get that electric tugboat. We want to turn over a lot of our cargo handling equipment, get those to be 0 emission. We want to get 40% of our truck trips to be 0 emissions. We want to get those vessels to slow down when they're coming into port. And we also want them to plug into power. As was just shown on that last slide, cargo handling equipment and ocean-going vessels, really, really a big problem. Those are big percentage-wise to the risk, and those are the areas that we're moving forward on. We're moving forward on all of these emission sources, but those are a couple of the big ones that we're pushing through. Next slide, please. So what happens when we implement the MCAS? A lot of information here on this slide. You'll see again the 4 communities that are here. That first bar So you can see in National City, it says 20.6. That is the same information that we just showed in that pie chart, but here it's just in a stacked bar, a little bit different way, but it's the same information. So in 2026, if we are successful in implementing those measures from the MCAS, it should drop down to 14.4, and then in 2030, it'll drop down to that 11.9. And then in Barrio Logan, downtown Coronado, again, you can see that downward trend because we're taking those actions. You can see in National City, that blue, again, that blue is ocean-going vessels. And we plug those vessels in, that's really going to reduce those emissions. Same thing with cargo handling equipment. We get rid of those diesel pieces of equipment. We bring in battery or whatever technology is available that does not emit, and we're going to reduce the risk there from that as well. Next slide, please. A little bit of a graphical representation of what we were just talking about. So residential cancer risk here. This is residential risk at a maximum receptor location. So this is basically somebody sitting in a house for 30 years being exposed to the same level of pollution. And you can see there on that first slide, that maximum receptor location, that's that 19.7 right there, just east of the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal. When we start implementing MCAS, you can see that those emissions go down. That receptor then moves. And then in 2030, that receptor then moves again even further south. So that blue dot there is the maximum receptor location. It's not that the risk goes away, but when that risk gets below 10, you can see that that yellow color kind of fades away. That is our goal, to get below 10. The tables that are below these graphics, those are the emission sources, and then they kind of add up to those total risk factors. As you can see, those are the same emission sources going through time, but the relative contribution to that risk changes as we're implementing various measures of the MCAS. Obvious one there is cargo handling equipment in 2019 is 8.1, but being successful and replacing a lot of that equipment, it drops down to 0.9. And that's the kind of the model that we're looking at, and that's the information that we're trying to get to, and the reduced health risk that we're trying to get to. Next slide, please. So similar maps, but this is in a different location. This is down in National City. You can see the same kind of thing. We have the three projected timeframes. We have the baseline, we have the forecasted 26, and the forecasted 2030 model. And again, with the emission sources in that table below, and the relative contribution changes between those as time goes on. In this instance, that maximum receptor location just doesn't change. It's just the way the model worked out. The emission sources are the same, they're going down, but that maximum risk location remains the same. So this is the residential maximum risk. Again, it's 30-year exposure constant at one location, but there are different ways to express the risk. If we go to the next slide, please. And one of those other ways is called residential chronic risk. So chronic risk, it's not cancer, but it's basically having, a number of symptoms potentially from breathing bad air. It's phlegm, cough, chronic bronchitis, lung inflammation, reduced pulmonary function. Basically your lungs are just not working the way they should because you're breathing poor air quality. None of it's good, but this is not cancer, right? So guidance from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, that is that agency there that's on the bottom of the graphic, OEHHA, Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. This is a state agency that really guides and dictates the science on health assessment and modeling. And it's constantly updating, we're constantly learning new things, but they really give us that guidance and kind of set up those guidelines as to how you interpret the results. And what they would say is that if the emission quotient is below 1, which all of these numbers are well below 1, then the emissions are not causing these issues. So while these numbers are below 1, and they only represent the emissions from our 2 marine cargo terminals, it's not all emissions from the region. So we know that these numbers don't reflect everything that's going on out there. They're just reflecting what is coming off of those 2 marine cargo terminals. So not saying that emissions from those terminals don't cause health issues. We know they do. It's a big reason why we have the MCAS and the HRA, and we're doing all these things. The point here is just, we're not the only thing out there emitting sources, but we are looking forward to, taking care of our fair share. Next slide, please. A third way to express this risk is called the population weighted cancer risk. So this is similar to the residential risk, but a little bit different. So the way this one works is basically instead of looking at one location with one receptor, we're looking at a collection of people within a census block. You could think of it as like a city block. All the folks that live in that city block, maybe there's 300 over here, 500 over there, 1,000 over there, whatever it is. And this is exposure to those folks over a 70-year period. These are the numbers of folks that you would expect to have cancer from being exposed in that city block for 70 years, 12 out of a million people. Again, this is only emissions from the marine terminals, not all the emissions from the region. It can be calculated and expressed in different ways. Different emissions, contribute to risk in different ways. And we have a responsibility here at the port to do what we can, like I was just saying. Next slide, please. And some of the things that we're doing, just kind of want to highlight the activity that we're going forward with now. So these are some of the current projects and actions that have just recently taken place and that we're still moving towards. One example is one of our partners, Dole Produce, that is a tenant on the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal. They just acquired 5 new zero-emission yard trucks. These are trucks that move the containers once they come off the ship. They move them around the terminal. They don't leave the terminal, but they do drive around the terminal. And the older ones would emit diesel emissions. The new ones don't. They're zero emissions. I'll just go to the bottom of the list. We're getting a little late here. So, Harbor Drive 2.0, that's an exciting project we work with a lot of partners on, Sandag, Caltrans, the city. This is going to have a lot of benefits to the community, getting those trucks off the freeway into the terminals or other industrial areas that they need to be, and vice versa, get them out of those community streets. I guess another thing to keep in mind on the MCAS is, the port is moving forward. We've got those goals. Staff is charging forward, trying to move forward on all fronts, all emissions, ocean-going vessels, cargo handling equipment, trucks, you name it. We're not prioritizing one over the other. We're just like a big snowplow. We're just trying to push everything forward and get it into the right space in the right area. And so we're not waiting for projects for mitigation. A lot of programs with government agencies, you wait for a project and then you get something from that project. You get them to clean up, or you get them to donate land or do something like that. That's not this situation. We're moving forward opportunistically as funding is allowed, as grant funds are out there, as our funding allows to move us out there. Partnerships with our tenants, partnerships with APCD, partnerships with the community, you name it. We are looking for any and all opportunities to move forward with our with our goals, trying to reduce emissions in the community. And I think there's just the last closing slide. I thank you for your time tonight. Again, Phil and myself are here to answer questions. We do have Matt McFalls, which is our consultant, who is really adept at the modeling software and the parameters and all those good things if you have any technical questions. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chewy.
Thank you, Peter and Phil. Folks who want to give any questions or comments, please raise your hand. And to start us off, John.
Yes, I'm obviously concerned with our community here in Barrio Logan, but for that matter, all the way down the South Bay, especially with some of our seniors who have been, I'm 72 years old and I've been here most of my life. So way beyond the pale, so to speak. And I'm one of the young guys. My point is that for some of us, we've already been exposed well over 30, 40 years to a lot of this. That being the case, once again, I bring up the fact that it's very important for us, obviously, to get as much attention on our particular group so that, we're not dying prematurely. I mean, eventually it's going to happen anyway, but, and there are some things that we can do. And I've suggested it several times, and that is being able to go to the state of California and request equipment, if you will, that would help reduce the risk. One of the big ones is, once again, whole house air purification systems. Brings heat, brings air conditioning, and takes out all the pollutants before it comes into your home. That being said, why aren't we pushing that? A lot of people don't know that much of this equipment can be purchased using your tax dollars, because when there's a necessity for medical equipment, you can deduct it off your taxes. Now, granted, some of the families, don't even make the threshold for that, but at least if we could get the word out and maybe get some extra consideration to have that happen. What's your thoughts?
Well, I agree that those systems can really help. I think, in a perfect world, you wouldn't need those systems, right? We'd get rid of these emission sources, and so they're not even entering your house to need those filters. But I do appreciate your comments. I think that, the port has participated with APCD in providing those single room air filters. They're not the whole house systems. But we have done some positive things in that space in that regard.
Yeah, and I would just add in there, John, thanks for that comment. The power of this steering committee is, if you guys want to advocate for those types of solutions in state funding, I think you have a powerful, group, and they'll listen, hopefully, to you. At the beginning of the meeting, the representative from CARB talked about the incentive group that's meeting. Maybe that's a good place for folks to attend and advocate for those types of home purification systems. So just my 2 cents.
Thank you, John, Phil, and Peter. Any other questions or comments on the health risk assessment? Maritza?
Thank you, Chewy. I just wanted to make a quick little comment. Thank you, Peter, for the presentation. I think that it was really good. Personally, as a community member, I appreciate how you tone down the language and to make it a little bit more accessible. It was awesome that there was visuals, and it seemed a little more engaging, which is great. I know that we've had a lot of back and forth of asking for more accessibility. So this is, I think, a big step towards that. And I just really appreciate the port has been taking in our recommendations and implementing them.
Thank you. We do try to, this stuff is really complicated. It's really dense, and it can be a real trick to try to translate it, if you will. And I guess I'll just say, I'll put up my contact information in here in the chat too. And I think we got the link there to the HRA. Folks want to take a look at that report, give me a call, send me an email, happy to talk it through, answer any questions, whatever you've got.
Thank you, Maritza and Peter. Any other questions or comments for the port? Hearing none.
All right, let me off easy tonight, I guess.
Yes.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Moving on to the next agenda item, we wanted to open it up for any general public comments folks want to make. And this could also include suggestions for next month's agenda. We do have the SERP annual progress report. But definitely would love to hear any other thoughts. John, followed by Jack.
I mentioned earlier that schools are opening up next week in Barrio Logan area. And if at all possible, I'd sure love to see us reach out to the schools in our particular area and let them know we're here for them. Let them know that, you got translators. And I mean, even if they're able just to see, a video presentation of what took place online at a time when they're able to look at it, At least this way they could at least address whatever issues and get a hold of you, Chewy, or someone else prior to the next meeting.
Thank you, John, for that suggestion. And I will post the San Diego Air District's YouTube page in the chat. It does include recordings from all our previous meetings. So please feel free to share that link around. Jack?
Whoops. Hi, Chewy. Thanks. You were asking about agenda items for next time, and I just wanted to remind everybody that I think David Soderman said he felt they were going to be able to come back with some information on monitoring stations. So that would be great to have on the agenda for next time.
Great, thank you. Any other suggestions or comments? Or announcements? Hearing none, I'll move along to the next agenda item. And want to hand it over to Domingo for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Chewy. Just wanted to thank our presenters tonight, and mainly all of the community members and all of our partner agencies, all the members of the CSC for their continued engagement. We certainly welcome all of the suggestions that everybody has to make these meetings more productive and more useful to everybody involved. We will be taking all your suggestions into consideration, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll follow up with a survey just to get a better sense of people's preferences in terms of in-person meetings or continuing hybrid, or I'm sorry, virtual or hybrid meetings, and also time of day. I know there's I have personally received many comments, kind of conflicting suggestions. People want meetings earlier, some people want them later. So we'll try and do our best to accommodate most folks, but just want to let everybody know that we're very open to all of your suggestions and we appreciate them.
Thank you, Domingo. And with that, I'll let folks go. And as a reminder, our next meeting is the 27th of September. It's always, well, for next month and until we change it, it's continued to be the 4th Tuesday of the month, same time. Thank you, everybody. Muchas gracias a todos. Your participation is always much appreciated. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Sorry, thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you. Who let the dogs out?
Oh, no.
Bye.
Good evening, everyone.
Buenas noches.
Night, everyone.
Good night.